My beloved child, before your thoughts race ahead, stay with this moment, because what unfolded last night was not the ending anyone expected. It was the beginning of a silent turning point that almost no one recognized. While the world believed everything was ordinary, unseen emotions were building beneath the surface. Someone connected to your destiny reached a place where pretending was no longer possible. They tried to stay composed. They tried to convince themselves that nothing had changed. Yet every heartbeat kept pulling them toward one truth they could no longer ignore. There are nights that disappear into memory without leaving a mark. Then there are nights that quietly rewrite the future. Last night belonged to the second kind. Your person found themselves overwhelmed by thoughts they had buried for far too long. Every distraction failed. Every conversation felt incomplete. Every attempt to move forward somehow circled back to the same unanswered feeling. They weren't searching for attention. They were searching for clarity. And sometimes clarity only arrives after everything inside feels impossible to control. What happened next surprised even them. Instead of pushing those emotions away, they allowed themselves to face them. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just honestly. For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking what everyone else expected and started asking what their own heart had been trying to say. That single question changed the direction of the entire night. Pause for a second and think about this. What if one honest moment has the power to reshape weeks, months, or even years of uncertainty? What if the future you've been wondering about quietly began shifting while no one was paying attention? Stay a little longer, because the answer isn't where most people expect it to be. As the hours passed, your person realized something that refused to leave their mind. Certain memories became unusually vivid. Familiar conversations echoed differently. Small moments that once seemed meaningless suddenly carried incredible weight. It wasn't coincidence. It was perspective changing. Sometimes life doesn't send louder signs. Sometimes it simply allows old moments to reveal new meanings. Yet the biggest surprise had not arrived. Morning approached, bringing with it something they couldn't avoid, a family gathering already planned long before these emotions surfaced. They considered staying away. They imagined making an excuse. It would have been easier to disappear for a while than to carry such heavy thoughts into a room filled with familiar faces. But something inside whispered otherwise. Not fear. Not pressure. A quiet confidence they had never felt before. It wasn't telling them exactly what to do. It was simply reminding them that hiding had never created peace. Running had never answered difficult questions. So they chose to show up, even though they had no idea what the day might reveal. The atmosphere felt ordinary on the outside. Conversations flowed. Laughter echoed across the room. Family members greeted one another as though it were just another gathering. Yet your person experienced every second differently. They weren't fully listening to the conversations around them. Their attention kept drifting inward, almost as if they were waiting for an invisible signal only they could recognize. Then something unexpected happened. A simple question from a relative stopped them in their tracks. It wasn't an extraordinary question. To everyone else, it sounded completely normal. But somehow, those ordinary words unlocked something extraordinary inside them. For a brief moment, the room seemed quieter. Time slowed. Their expression changed in a way that only the most observant person could have noticed. Suddenly they realized they were no longer carrying confusion the way they had only hours before. They were carrying courage. Not the loud kind that demands attention. The quiet kind that changes decisions forever. Before you move on, hold this thought close. Because what they chose to do next inside that gathering became the moment no one saw coming. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It came straight from a place they had ignored for far too long. And once that choice was made, nothing about the story could remain the same. You may think you already know what happened next. You probably don't. A quiet shift is already happening, and if you've stayed this far, you're exactly where you need to be. The moment inside that family gathering was far more significant than anyone realized. From the outside, everything still looked ordinary. Plates were being passed around. Conversations drifted from one topic to another. Smiles appeared naturally. But beneath that calm surface, your person was standing at the edge of a decision that had been forming long before anyone entered the room. Have you ever noticed how one sentence can completely change the meaning of an entire day? That is exactly what happened. The question they had just heard continued echoing in their thoughts. It wasn't because the words were extraordinary, it was because they arrived at the exact moment their heart was finally ready to hear them. Suddenly, every excuse they had repeated to themselves seemed weaker than before. Every reason to stay silent began losing its strength. They realized something that had been hidden in plain sight all along: waiting forever would never create certainty. Instead of stepping away from the gathering, they did something no one expected. They became fully present. For the first time in a long while, they weren't distracted by yesterday or worried about tomorrow. They listened carefully to every conversation. They noticed expressions they had ignored before. They recognized how quickly life moves and how many opportunities quietly disappear simply because people hesitate. Stay with this story a little longer. Because the next realization connects directly to you. As they observed the people around them, one family member shared a simple memory about taking chances before the right moment seemed to exist. It wasn't advice directed at them. It wasn't even part of a serious conversation. Yet those words landed exactly where they needed to. Your person felt an unexpected sense of calm. Not because every question had been answered, but because they finally understood that perfect timing is rarely announced. Sometimes destiny whispers instead of shouting. Sometimes the clearest direction arrives disguised as an ordinary conversation. A small smile appeared on their face. Someone nearby noticed. Another relative quietly asked, "You seem different today." They didn't know how to explain it. How could they describe something that had no single cause? How could they explain that one emotional night had transformed the way they saw everything the next morning? So they simply smiled again. That smile carried more truth than any long explanation ever could. If this story is speaking to you, I'd love to know what part feels familiar. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're enjoying this journey together, subscribing simply means you'll be here for the next chapter whenever it arrives. Now here's where everything becomes even more interesting. As the gathering continued, conversations slowly turned toward the future, plans, dreams, hopes, and the paths people wanted to take. Most listened casually. Your person didn't. Every word seemed to point toward the same realization: life keeps moving, whether people are ready or not. That awareness awakened something powerful inside them. They silently made a promise. Not to force outcomes. Not to chase what wasn't meant for them. But never again to let fear make important decisions. That promise changed the energy around them in ways they couldn't yet explain. Even those closest to them sensed a new confidence. It wasn't louder. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, peaceful, unmistakably real. And then, almost unexpectedly, another conversation began, one that gently brought your name into their thoughts without anyone saying it aloud. What followed next became the most unforgettable part of the entire gathering. No one could have predicted it. And once it happened, the direction of this story quietly began changing forever. Wait until the next part, because the unexpected choice they make next is the very reason this night, and this family gathering, will never be remembered as ordinary again. Something invisible was already unfolding, and almost no one in that room understood its importance. The family gathering continued as if it were an ordinary afternoon, yet your person could feel that life was quietly arranging pieces they had never noticed before. Every conversation seemed to carry a hidden meaning. Every pause felt intentional. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with noise, it arrives wrapped inside the simplest moments. Then it happened. Someone casually mentioned the future. Not in a dramatic way. Just an everyday conversation about where life was leading, how quickly time passes, and how certain opportunities should never be ignored. Most people smiled and moved on. But your person froze for a heartbeat. Those words reached deeper than anyone could have imagined. It felt as though the uncertainty of the previous night suddenly met the clarity of the present moment. Every emotion they had tried to silence transformed into quiet determination. They no longer wanted to keep wondering what could happen someday. They wanted to become the kind of person who was ready when the right moment finally arrived. Think about this for a second. What if the greatest turning point isn't an unexpected event? What if it's the instant someone finally decides to stop doubting themselves? That realization changed everything. Your person slowly stepped away from the crowd for a few peaceful moments. Not because they wanted to escape, but because they wanted to hear their own thoughts without distraction. The sounds of laughter echoed in the background, yet inside, an entirely different conversation was taking place. They remembered every lesson life had quietly taught them. The missed chances. The delayed words. The moments they wished they had trusted themselves sooner. Instead of feeling regret, they felt gratitude. Those experiences had prepared them for this exact season. When they returned to the gathering, something about them was different. Their posture was calmer. Their eyes carried confidence. Even relatives who hadn't spoken to them all day noticed the change. One person smiled and said, "You seem lighter today." Another quietly added, "It's good to see that spark again." Neither of them knew the real reason. They couldn't see the promise your person had made within themselves only moments earlier. And that promise had everything to do with becoming honest about what truly mattered. As the afternoon drew closer to its end, one final conversation unexpectedly brought everyone together. Stories were shared. Laughter filled the room. Hope replaced hesitation. Your person looked around and realized something extraordinary. Life doesn't wait until everything is perfect before opening new doors. It simply asks whether you're willing to walk toward them. That thought stayed with them. It became the quiet answer they had been searching for all along. Before leaving the gathering, they took one last look around, not because they were saying goodbye, but because they knew this ordinary day would become unforgettable in hindsight. One emotional night had led to one unexpected gathering. One unexpected gathering had awakened one life-changing decision. And somewhere beyond what anyone in that room could see, a new chapter had already begun. The next step would not be rushed. It would not be forced. It would unfold naturally, one meaningful moment at a time. Sometimes the greatest surprises don't come from losing control. They come from discovering the strength that was waiting underneath it all. Now listen closely. Because what happened after the gathering was not loud enough to make headlines, yet powerful enough to reshape the direction of an entire journey. As your person walked away, they didn't feel the same weight they had carried the night before. The confusion had not completely disappeared, but something stronger had taken its place. Purpose. Not the kind that arrives with perfect answers. The kind that quietly says, keep moving, you're finally facing the right direction. The evening sky stretched above them, calm and endless. They replayed every moment from the family gathering, the unexpected question, the meaningful conversations, the smiles that seemed ordinary at first but now felt like pieces of a much larger picture. It was as though life had been preparing them without revealing the full reason. Then another thought appeared. What if this wasn't only about me? That single question opened an entirely new perspective. Instead of focusing on fear, they began thinking about connection. Instead of wondering what they might lose, they imagined what could finally be built through honesty, patience, and courage. They understood that real change never begins with dramatic gestures. It begins with one sincere decision that is repeated every single day. Stay until the final moment, because the next realization is where everything quietly begins to align. As they continued their walk, a gentle breeze seemed to clear away the last traces of uncertainty. They didn't receive a magical sign. No mysterious message appeared. Yet inside, they felt something even more valuable. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when the heart finally stops arguing with itself. They smiled without realizing it. For the first time in a long while, they weren't chasing certainty. They were becoming someone who could recognize opportunity when it arrived. That was the unexpected outcome of the family gathering. It had never been about impressing anyone. It had been about discovering themselves. And once they understood that, every future choice became clearer. If this story has touched something within you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Sharing your perspective helps this journey grow, and if you'd like to continue discovering stories like this together, subscribing is simply a way to make sure we meet again in the next chapter. But the story doesn't end here. As your person looked toward the road ahead, they sensed that the coming days would present small opportunities disguised as ordinary moments. A familiar conversation. An unexpected encounter. A decision that once seemed impossible suddenly becoming natural. Most people would overlook those moments. They wouldn't. Because last night taught them that emotions can reveal hidden truths. And the family gathering taught them that courage doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives in silence, changes everything from within, and waits patiently for the right time to reveal its impact. So if you've been wondering whether quiet moments can truly change a life, remember this story. A single emotional night became the doorway to a new beginning. A simple family gathering became the place where fear lost its voice. And an ordinary day became the foundation for an extraordinary future. The next chapter hasn't been written yet. But one thing is already certain. Your person's greatest transformation didn't begin when they found all the answers. It began the moment they chose not to run from the questions anymore.